Australia urged to release terrifying climate security analysis, a classified intelligence warning of ecosystem collapse by 2030 creates a crisis of transparency and preparedness.
A coalition of former Australian national security leaders, led by ex-Defence Force Chief Admiral Chris Barry, is demanding the government publicly release its own climate security intelligence assessment.
This follows the UK's declassification of a report aided by MI5 and MI6, which outlines a reasonable worst-case scenario of geopolitical chaos triggered by biodiversity loss.
The core conflict pits official secrecy against public accountability, with allies sounding alarms that Australia appears to be ignoring.
The withheld Australian report, produced by the Office of National Intelligence 3 years ago, has been described by an independent senator as terrifying, raising the critical question: is the government concealing risks to avoid necessary, difficult preparation?
The intelligence baseline, ecosystem collapse as a security multiplier. UK assessment frames environmental degradation as a direct, near-term threat to global stability and nuclear security.
The UK Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs report, with intelligence agency input, establishes a direct causal chain from ecological failure to national security crises.
It identifies a realistic possibility of the collapse of critical biomass, including Russian and Canadian boil forests, Southeast Asian coral reefs, and the Himalayan ecosystem by 2030.
This matters now because these collapses are not isolated environmental events but threat multipliers.
The analysis explicitly links the Himalayan ecosystem's decline to dwindling water supplies for billions, thereby escalating tensions between nuclear-armed states China, India, and Pakistan.
This transforms climate change from a long-term environmental concern into an immediate geopolitical and strategic intelligence priority, setting a benchmark that Australia's allies expect it to acknowledge and act upon.
Analysis secrecy as a strategic vulnerability. Withholding the ONI report undermines democratic accountability and delays essential civil and military contingency planning.
The Australian government's refusal to declassify its Office of National Intelligence ONI climate security assessment creates a dangerous preparedness gap.
Admiral Barry argues that keeping this information in the bottom drawer does not reduce the risk, it only delays preparation.
The specific details likely mirror the UK's findings: cascading failures from crop failures, water insecurity, and disease outbreaks leading to mass migration, political polarisation, and economic instability.
By not being open with citizens, the government avoids difficult public conversations about resource allocation, defence posture, and diplomatic strategy in a climate-disrupted world.
This secrecy is particularly indefensible given the report comes from a key AUKUS partner, suggesting a divergence in risk assessment or political will that could weaken the alliance's coordinated response to shared threats.
Verdict: a test of political will. In the face of converging crises, pressure will mount for disclosure as ecological tipping points approach, forcing a reckoning on climate-led security strategy.
The predicted consequence is escalating political and public pressure, compelling the Australian government to eventually release a redacted version of the ONI report.
The final assessment is that strategic opacity is unsustainable.
As the 2030 timeline for potential ecosystem collapses approaches, the security community, political opposition, and informed public will demand transparency to validate government preparedness.
The government's current stance risks being perceived as negligent or politically motivated, damaging public trust.
The strategic verdict is that Australia must align with its allies, publicly confront the terrifying intelligence, and begin the complex task of hardening national security and foreign policy against the intertwined threats of climate change, resource conflict, and state failure.